Hello, I'm John. I'm on board Corrick. We're at anchor in Stanswood Bay, just off Southampton. We've anchored for lunch, having had a very lovely morning looking at the points of sail trim. I hope you find this video interesting and useful. Thank you for watching. Getting the points of sailing right is one of those things that's quite difficult to teach on a course, because you're normally struggling to get from A to B in order to get through the syllabus of other stuff, and sometimes the finer points of just how to sail a boat into a given wind to get to a given point sometimes gets missed. So we've come out today. We have spent a lot of time setting the boat up and getting the sails right and understanding the controls for all the sails. Then we spent some time just getting comfortable just sailing the boat, and then we spent some time going round a buoy, using that as a reference point to just double check everything in terms of the points of sailing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce all of those and show you how we do them and the things to think about whilst you're doing them. There are some lovely little places in the Solent to do this sort of exercise. You really need to be ideally out of the waves and out of the big tide, and Stanswood Bay is a good place for that. And there's a nice little racing mark in the middle of there. Because we had a northwesterly breeze, we had very little sea, very little tide, and allowed us to concentrate on the points of sailing themselves. I like to start this exercise with a beam reach in towards the mark, and we'd picked up that little sailing mark there that you can see just bobbing around. And as I say, we came in on a very gentle beam reach, got ourselves sorted out, made sure we had the telltales flying exactly as we wanted it. And Brian was at this point really comfortable with that particular point of sail and the controls that we had. So it looks a bit like this. We had the buoy, we had the wind on our beam, and we were sailing along nicely, closing distance on the buoy and just making sure we were approaching it really nicely, with the sails at partially in, about halfway in, but we were tweaking this as we went. Then once we got a bit closer to the buoy, what we were able to do was to very gently harden up, and we came up 10 degrees at a time, just gently bringing the head sail and the main in together, because of course these points aren't cardinal. They're not. You don't have to sail exactly 45 degrees, then 45 degrees. We were just inching up gently, bringing the sails in and watching how the sails behaved as we brought them in. And sometimes we oversheeted and we slowed down, and sometimes we were too slack and the sails were fluttering. But this gave Brian a good opportunity to just keep adjusting as we went. I was operating the sails, we were having a conversation about how everything looked, we were talking about where and when we would adjust things like the halyard tension and the clew tension, much more as a discussion point than anything else. But as I say, we were at this point close hold. So the sail, or just off close hold at this point, the head sail had come in. We then brought the main in to join it, came another few degrees up, tightened everything up. And as I say, what I'd like to think you can see there is the telltale on the back of the main flying the whole time, and we were watching the telltales on the head sail to see the same thing. And we were taking it nice and slowly, nice gentle approach up to the buoy that you can just see there, just on the very left-hand side of the screen. But by this stage, the point of sail that we were on was close hold. Sails in reasonably tight as we make our way 45-ish degrees to the wind, and making our way upwind. This is the sort of standard approach to a buoy that you might do, for example, in racing. Once we'd got there, we then needed to put in a tack, so we had a good look at it. Everything was coming in tighter and tighter and tighter. As I say, these things aren't terribly coarse, it's all very fine. There were some very gentle little wind shifts while we were doing that, and because we were doing reasonably long runs, we got a chance to look at that and see it. And we were picking up transits on the shore. There's a really nice tower that on the beach here, which was really helpful to us as we approached the buoy. And as I say, all the time we were looking at the shape of the sail, the way the telltales were flying, how it was all hanging together. So by the time we were within a few yards of the buoy, we were in pretty much as tight as we could be for the wind conditions themselves. And we started to then set ourselves up for the tack, because having approached the buoy at 45 degrees, we now wanted to go behind it but stay hard on the wind in order to avoid getting overly close to the buoy. So we set ourselves up for the tack. Just final look at everything, checked all of the telltales, made sure there was still a bit of tide running in the bay here, so we wanted to get well beyond it. As I say, set ourselves up for the tack.
Going into irons was a bit of a mistake on my part, but
And that was us going through 90 degrees to put our head straight through the wind and put ourselves on the other tack, again close hold. So this was going from one to the other, and this was making our way gently upwind, which we did. We didn't go too far because obviously it started to get a little bit shallower, and then what we were then able to do was to start bearing away. So just watching the tack itself, we just put the boat straight through the wind. And then once we had got onto that other tack, we set ourselves up for just a few minutes just to make sure that we were exactly set up, and that what we were doing here was comparing the boat speed on one tack to the other, just to make sure that we were doing much the same thing and there hadn't been any sudden change. But as I say, every time we were changing something, we were checking the impact on the boat speed in order to really concentrate on how efficiently we were sailing the boat. As I say, it then started to get a bit shallow, so it was time to bear away, and we then eased everything off to get ourselves back onto a beam reach. And it's just a case of spotting and then easing the main, and then the head sail was going to follow that pretty quickly. So we'd gone effectively from one beam reach to another through close hold, and we sailed back along very gently parallel to the shore, and we got those sails eased back out again to almost exactly the same position they had been on as we had on the run up. We then started to move into another and different point of sail, which was to get onto a very broad reach. So this was the first time for this one. What we started to do was to ease the main and ease the head sail, bear away off the wind. That's it, just being slackened there. And we were heading with the wind at a relative angle of about 140, 150 degrees as we started making our way away from the buoy. The way in which the telltales work here on these tacks isn't quite as impressive, and your telltales tend to fold over a little bit more, but we were able to concentrate on checking the boat speed and how we went downwind, and we experimented with the angle at which the head sail effectively cut off from being useful, and we saw a real change in the speed there. So we were having conversations about sailing the angles downwind and how that might be different depending on the wind strength. And again, at this point we were talking about changing the controls on the main, so easing of the clew and easing of the main halyard, and also the head sail halyard, in order to make the draft of the sails a bit bigger, a bit deeper, and then a little bit more of a bear away, easing the main out a little bit further to get ourselves onto a run. And at this point you'll see that the head sail starts to go very saggy indeed as it gets blanked by the main. So by this point we'd been experimenting with various degrees of broad reaching, as I say, shielding the head sail and exposing it again as we moved gently downwind with the wind at a relative 140 or so. And then we started to have a conversation about what it would look like if we went onto a run. As you can see here, the head sail's doing nothing at all effectively, and what we then did was got it out onto the other side into a configuration known as goose winging. We spoke about the preventer last episode. We did actually put a pole up at one point in here in order to hold the head sail out. I just don't get an opportunity to show it too much here, but we then got the mainsail
all the way out, and then took the head sail across and started going dead downwind, and had a good conversation about feeling the breeze on the back of your head, just in order to make sure you don't run the risk of that accidental jibe that we were talking about the other day. So just a tiny kick of the boat over to port should, sorry, that's me just touching my ear just to talk about the feel of exactly where the wind is. And we managed to get the gently over so that we got the head sail starting to fill. And there it goes there, just filling occasionally in order to give us a little bit more drive. And as I say, on one of these runs we then pulled it out just in order to hold it out and see what effect that had as we went downwind. And again, always talking about the positions of the amount of tension in the halyard and the clew. But the main part of this exercise was just to experiment with those various points of sail and see how effective they are. At this point we then started to talk about putting a jibe in order to see what it looked like on the other tack. Pulled the main into the centre, tiller went over, put the jibe in, and then ease everything back out again. Having finished with the goose-winged part of the run, we went on to a broad reach on the other tack. And we repeated this a couple of times, and it was very useful indeed to see the progression and the understanding of just exactly where the main and the head sail should be on each of the points of sailing as we went through them. And what we did then was we started to come back round to port, hardened up ever so gently, put ourselves back onto a beam reach, and ideally you can see this picture doesn't look too different to what it looked like right at the beginning. And we were having that conversation about just how we did this. And we did this a couple of times in order to just drive home each of those points. So if it's helpful, I'll just recap. We approached the buoy from a reasonably long way out on a beam reach, so wind absolutely on the side of the boat, the sails not in terribly far, not out terribly far, the fastest and most comfortable point of sailing. And we just got ourselves really comfortable with how that all worked, and trimming, and how the telltales all operated. Once we were comfortable with that and we were a bit closer to the buoy, we sheeted in a bit, brought the boat onto the point of sailing that is close hold, and that allowed us to close get much closer to the wind. Got reasonably close to the buoy just in order to watch how that all happened. We then put the boat about. We talked about but did not put the boat into irons where it's head to wind and going nowhere. We avoided that, thankfully. Put the boat on the other tack. Again, this point of sail was close hold, and we continued to go upwind in towards the slightly shallower water, and then very quickly we were able to start bearing away such that we were on a beam reach, exactly as we had been before, sails in much the same position, and all the time we were comparing the boat speed as we went through these various manoeuvres. We saw that was all nice and straightforward, and once we had gone along across the wind for a little bit, we started to bear away. Always a little bit more tricky going downwind. The effect of blanking the head sail by the main can affect the speed very greatly, but we experimented with how the angles changed very slightly. Then we started to go dead downwind, and indeed, very much as predicted, the head sail started to collapse, and we took it onto the other side and put ourselves into a position where we were then goose winging, so main out one side, head sail out the other side, all very nice.
I hope that was useful. The points of sail, when teaching them, look pretty obvious on the ground, but it's not until you actually put them into practice that you start to understand how they work and how you get from one to the other. Thank you very much for watching.